After looking at the P-Class 280 steam locomotive nearly 3 weeks ago, I had the idea to check out another New Zealand locomotive in Train Simulator. This time, we will be shining the spotlight on the DA class, a classic diesel dating back to the mid-1950s. She was brought to TS by a Brazilian developer by the name of Diesel Workshop. But first, a brief history of the DA class. This was essentially an off-the-shelf version of the EMD G12 family, albeit with modifications to suit New Zealand's 3-foot 6-inch gauge track and a tighter loading gauge. The DAs were brought in to replace steam locomotives in the North Island, and 146 examples of this class were built between 1955 and 1967. Most of the class were built by General Motors in London, Ontario, Canada, or LaGrange, Illinois, USA, with the exception of 10 locomotives built by Clyde Engineering of Australia in 1957. 1431 was one of the Australian-built DAs. The DAs could be found on both passenger and freight trains all over the North Island, although there were some lines where they couldn't run due to axle loading restrictions. Prior to 1967, these engines were unable to run south of Paikakairiki on the Kapiti coast due to the restrictive clearances of the Paikakairiki hill tunnels, and it was in 1967 when the floors of those tunnels were lowered, thus allowing the DAs to run through to Wellington. Between 1978 and 1983, 80 examples of the DA class were rebuilt by Clyde Engineering, with another 5 rebuilt at New Zealand Railway's own Hutt workshops. One of the engines rebuilt at Hutt was DA 1459, which became DC 4951, and she is still in service today. The locomotives had their short hoods cut down to improve visibility for the driver, and their original 1,425 horsepower EMD 12-567 series prime movers were replaced with slightly more powerful engines, which produced 1,650 horsepower. The rebuilds were designated as the DC class, but I won't go into further detail about their history as that's not the point of this video. What I will say is that, as of early October 2025, at least 13 DCs are still in service with KiwiRail, while 7 have been saved for preservation, including DC 4818, formerly DA 1481, at the Glenbrook Vintage Railway. One of the remaining operational locomotives is DC 4260, which was originally built in 1967 as DA 1531, and rebuilt in 1979. As for the DAs that did not get rebuilt, they remained in service into the 1980s, with the last example being withdrawn in 1989. 6 unrebuilt DAs have survived into preservation, with the survivors being Class Leader DA 1400 at Auckland's Museum of Transport and Technology, albeit in storage at the Motat 2 site, DA 1401 with Fielding Steam Rail, DA 1410 at Steam Incorporated's Paikakairiki depot, DA 1429 in private ownership, and stored at the Mission Bush Steel Mill as of December 2024, DA 1431 with Steam Incorporated, but currently based in the South Island, and DA 1471 with Steam Inc., and still under restoration in Paikakairiki at the time of this video's production. If my research is correct, Diesel Workshop released their DA model sometime in 2021, although I couldn't find the exact date, and she is still available to buy from their website as of early October 2025. For whatever reason, only the Phase 3 and Phase 4 variants were modelled, and they're sold separately for a full price of $15.63 each, and that's in New Zealand's currency, mind. As far as I can tell, The only differences between these two are the tail light design and paintwork on the headstocks, so I don't see why they had to be sold separately instead of simply bundled as one pack. There are a few notable differences between these later variants and the earlier Phase 1 and Phase 2. For one thing, the headlights and number boards are more streamlined, and neither Phase 3 nor Phase 4 had the rear walking platform, which was only present on the Australian-built DAs. The Phase 4 locomotives also had a twin-lens tail light instead of the more traditional single lens, and the twin lens was retained during rebuilding as the DC class. You only get one livery with the DAs in Train Simulator, namely Carnation Red. This was the first livery worn by the class, and it's perhaps the most well-known of all the liveries they wore over the years. I don't know about you, but personally, I'm disappointed in the absence of the International Orange livery, also known as Fruit Salad, as opposed to Big Red Car or Hot Potato. Come to think of it, it would have been cool to see DA 1448 included in her rebuilt condition, with a cut-down short hood, shunters refuges, and the new designation of DA 822, later DAR 517. Another variant that wasn't included for TS was the DAA, a batch of 6 DAs that were modified for heavy shunting at Te Rapa Hump Yard in the city of Hamilton. Including the DAA would have made for some good future-proofing in case we ever get a 70s or 80s era depiction of Te Rapa Yard in the game. As for the modelling, I think Diesel Workshop did a decent job capturing the look of these classic locomotives, although there's a couple of things I find strange. I don't know how to describe it, but something just looks off about the number font on the DAs in-game. That goes for the cabside number plate as well as the front and rear number boards. I used to think the cab interior looked pretty good, but now I don't know what to make of it, upon realising that the control stand looks nothing like it does on the real locomotives whose cabs I've seen. In any case, driving the DA in Train Simulator hits different from most of the other locomotives I've tried out, because I was lucky to have a cab ride in the preserved DA 1431 at Steam Incorporated's open weekend in January 2023, and even got to sit in the driver's seat, but only after the driver had changed ends and moved over to DA 1410's cab. However, one thing I didn't like about this experience was how cramped the cab felt. The cab functionality is fairly basic. In other words, you've got the standard throttle, reverser, brakes, and headlights, but not many other levers or switches in here are actually functional. I also noticed that the normal keyboard command for the instrument lights, which is the I key, doesn't work, and yet, pressing L for the cab light does work. As for the in-game sounds, I think they do the job well enough, although that's just from the perspective of a rail fan who's seen the real things in action numerous times, and is by no means an expert on this class. Even so, I'll still do a comparison between the in-game and real versions of the DA, and to anyone who's more familiar with these locomotives, feel free to leave a comment and tell us if you think the in-game sounds are good, bad, or so crude that they could give the ex-Iron Horse House Class 27 a run for her money. In the scenario editor, you can change the numbers to anything from the 1400 to 1545 range, as is appropriate for the DA class, but it would be unrealistic for these models to show any numbers below 1440. 1471 is the only DA from either Phase 3 or Phase 4 to be preserved in her original/unrebuilt condition, which makes her the only preserved DA whose number would be realistic for the model in TS. Even with the aforementioned downsides in mind, I still like pottering about with the DA from time to time. However, this locomotive has very limited, if not borderline non-existent, usage potential in Train Simulator because there are barely any New Zealand routes available for the game. The only ones that come to mind are the Payware Midland line, Springfield to Aikens, which you can find on Steam, and the freeware Pleasant Point Railway, which you can download from the Train Simulation New Zealand website. Historically, and apart from one instance with 1471, following an overhaul at Hillside Workshops, the DA class did not run in the South Island, although 1431 has been there numerous times in the preservation era. There are so many sections of the North Island's rail network that I'd love to see in either Train Simulator Classic or Train Sim World 6, but for the purposes of this video, I'll only make one suggestion, that being the line from Whangarei to Opua, or at the very least, just Otiria to Opua, as it was in the 1980s. The DAs were still running over that line at the time, and you'd be able to experience the unusual street running section through the town of Kawakawa, not to mention the pleasant riverside scenery along the line to Opua. These days, most of the railway east of Kawakawa is now a heritage line, and branded as the Bay of Islands Vintage Railway. For reference, this footage was recorded in April 2024. I wanted to like Diesel Workshop's rendition of the DA class, and to an extent, I do. The sounds are alright, I suppose, and it's good to see another New Zealand diesel in Train Simulator, alongside the DJ class. However, there are a couple of aspects of this pack that still bother me somewhat, that being the inclusion of only 2 variants and only 1 livery, as well as the prime mover and brake hiss being far too loud for my liking, although that could just be because of my brain not handling loud noises all that well. If the missing Phase 1 and Phase 2 variants, not to mention all the liveries worn by DAs over the years, were included, or at the very least, if the Phase 4 and Phase 3 variants were not sold separately, then I'd have an easier time deciding whether or not I can recommend the DA to other Train Simulator players. In her current state, I think she deserves a 6.5 out of 10.